Sorry. Well, I'm 83 years old, a former British subject, and I've lived through all the wars since 1939. I was born at the beginning of 1939. Since wars are becoming more and more destructive and never seem to achieve a better world, do we need a pact tying us to the US and the UK, AUKUS? Will Australia be obliged to follow either of these two countries into yet even more conflict?
Anne.
Thank you, Brenda. It's lovely to see you here. Thank you for the question. I think there is an important role for collective security. And historically, if you look at attempts at collective security, many of them have failed because of differences in values and an assumption of universal kind of values around security. I think for Australia, it's important that we do have alliances with the US and with the UK that would help us in security and in defence matters. It's an important alliance for Australia and one that we need to pursue. But that doesn't preclude us from also pursuing, as Dorinda suggested, security and peace in our region. And Penny Wong has been incredibly active as the Foreign Minister, going out there and in the Pacific, with Indonesia, even resetting our ties with China even, or the ways in which we relate with China. There is a huge part for us to play in our region. But there is also an importance for us to maintain a security alliance with like-minded countries.
Sorry, Anne, but that's trying to walk both sides of the street. And at certain points...
Well,
OK, here's an example. We hear this a lot. If there was a conflict over Taiwan tomorrow, you wouldn't be walking two sides of the street, and there are choices to be made. So while you're building closer relationships with China right now, inevitably, choices are made about where Australia's interests are served. Are they more served by closer ties to the UK and the US than they are in ties with China?
Well, I don't think it's about building more closer ties with China. I think that's kind of misconstruing the relationship here. I think we do have a very strong trade relationship with China. I mean, let's face it, we rely on China for a lot of the products that we use every day. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. I do think that we need to build our sovereign capability more, and we're certainly working on that, and Ed Husick has done some amazing work in that space, and we need to be more independent. But we do have... China is an important trading partner for Australia. That doesn't mean that we can't call out China on human rights abuses. That doesn't mean that, you know, we can't have the kind of relationship or diplomatic ties with China that allow us to still maintain our sovereignty and our security and the security of our region, Stan. You know, like, you can have a friend, but be able to be very frank with that friend and, you know, have that friendship on your terms.
Keith, that's not often how China responds, though. And of course, we've seen China take trade sanctions against Australia when it doesn't like decisions that are made. Now we see Australia taking out Chinese-supplied cameras from defence installations because of concerns about spying.
We should be building our own cameras.
So how do we manage this moment, Keith?
I think to the question, Brenda, I've served in war. I was in Afghanistan 3 times. I would never wish that on anyone else or my children. So I'm not in the business of starting wars. We're in the business of preventing wars. And weakness is provocative. So it's in our interest to form alliances, especially with like-minded democracies, because democracies are being threatened by autocracies around the world. And I ask you to look at 2 examples. The end of the Afghanistan war, which was tragic, that sent a signal that contributed to the invasion by Russia of Ukraine. It sent a signal of weakness. But then you look at the people of Ukraine and what they're doing standing up to the Russian invasion. That is sending a signal to the region, one that I think will bring us peace in this region. So it's important that we show strength and that we stand with allies who are democracies.
Brenda, it's such a good question because obviously people feel that, you know, if only we could just do things easily. If you look at Northern Europe, where the Second World War was largely fought, where my father served as a service, you know, was in the war, NATO, which was formed in 1948, has sort of kept the peace. Not perfectly, but sort of kept the peace ever since then. And so alliances are not just a way of kind of protecting yourself, they enhance your own sovereignty because they reduce the risk that any one country will attack you. And I know that that is what the architects of AUKUS, and I was the BBC's North America editor when it got signed and the French suddenly pulled their ambassador out of Washington, which seemed an extraordinary thing to do. But it does seem interesting what has happened. And Australia plays a vital role in the Five Eyes Agreement. And, you know, I was endlessly asked to talk about the special relationship.
This is the intelligence sharing agreement.
Yeah, the intelligence sharing agreement between Australia, New Zealand, Britain, Canada and the US. And the US really value that, and that is really important towards national security as well. So cooperation, I think, if you look over history, has helped us and helped stop wars, not start them.
I'm not sure Brenda's entirely convinced, are you, Brenda?
No, doesn't look convinced.
Well, over the past 50 years or so, we've been drawn into wars by the US. The US took us into you know, Vietnam and into all these other places. Is this going to happen again? This is what I'm saying. If we have a pact with them and and the US decides, not us, the US decides that they're going to go into a war, do we follow like we've done before?
I'll go to Dorinda.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Brenda, and you've articulated that so beautifully. And what I was going to say is that what is extremely obvious, and Anne actually mentioned it, was about our sovereign capability. We do not have the infrastructure here in Australia to support nuclear submarines. That is obvious. We are getting into an arrangement and into a relationship, an ongoing relationship with the US, because we don't have that sovereign capability. We are actually creating a rod for our own back. So you're exactly right in what you're saying. And we absolutely, I mean, the Greens have always had a policy about no nuclear and no nuclear subs, and we will continue to stand by that. So I think we have to honour that.
Thank you, Brenda.